Camilla Parker Bowles, 6th of September, 1997, Westminster Abbey, is today Queen Consort of the United Kingdom. She is identified in formal terms by title and public function, and by institutional roles within the royal household. But before she became Queen Consort, before she symbolized continuity in the monarchy, she was publicly identified as the woman at the center of a royal marital breakdown. Her origins lie in a landed professional family with ties to the military and British upper-middle-class institutions. Those origins shaped social networks, educational pathways, and marriage prospects. Her economic foundation derived from family connections, marriage alliances, and income linked to private estate management and publishing royalties associated with family members. Influential decisions included choices of companions, responses to media exposure, and legal and reputational strategies. Internal conflicts involved overlapping marriages, public scandal, and institutional responses from the palace and government. Her transformation over decades moved from private social figure to senior royal consort while retaining contested public legitimacy. Before we begin, please comment where in the world you're watching from. I'd love to know that this story is being watched from all around the globe. Camilla Rosemary Shand was born on the 17th of July, 1947, at King Edward VII Hospital for Officers in London. Her father, Major Bruce Shand, came from a lineage with documented military service and connections to landholding families in Suffolk. These associations provided the Shand family with both social status and ongoing involvement in the traditions characteristic of Britain's landed establishment. Camilla's mother, Rosalind Maud Cubitt, belonged to a family with a long-standing dual profile in commerce and land ownership, notable among the English upper classes. Archival sources on the Cubitt lineage highlight a network of property holdings and connections to other families with similar social standing. Throughout the 1950s and the 1960s, the structure of these familial networks shaped the educational opportunities available to Camilla. Enrollment documents demonstrate her attendance at private institutions known for their associations with country house society. These schools frequently served as entry points into social circles dominated by British elites, providing both formal and informal instruction in the customs and expectations of the upper classes. Academic records are complemented by references in social directories of the era, which note her regular participation in equestrian sport. In particular, involvement in polo and riding communities formed a significant component of her social experience, reflecting patterns observed among mid-20th century aristocratic and professional families. The economic foundation for this lifestyle is traceable through estate records and family account books, which indicate a primary reliance on inherited property, the proceeds of family land, and military pensions issued for prior service. There is little archival evidence of direct entrepreneurial enterprise or commercial employment as a principal source of family income. Instead, the available financial documentation points to the continuity of inherited wealth and the prudent management of properties as means of sustaining social position. Occasional secretarial and organizational work performed by Camilla in London is recorded in early employment registers and in correspondence relating to her activities during this period. In addition to formal employment, records of family events and invitations from the 1950s through the 1960s show Camilla's involvement as a hostess at social gatherings. These events functioned as key venues for maintaining and expanding the family's social connections. Hosting duties, as documented in both contemporary press coverage and private family correspondence, reinforced patterns of reciprocal obligation and alliance among peers in the country house set. By the late 1960s and into the 1970s, Camilla's established social trajectory brought her into frequent and sustained contact with members of the royal circle. The process is traceable in guest lists, attendance logs at equestrian events, and accounts published in society registers. These records demonstrate not only proximity to royal social life, but also the mechanism by which long-standing networks facilitated integration into elite circles. In sum, the combination of military heritage, land-based wealth, targeted education, and social event participation provided a durable foundation for Camilla's emerging role within the upper echelons of British society during this period. On the 26th of July, 1973, Camilla Shand and Andrew Parker Bowles were married, as shown in surviving civil and parish records. The union was formally registered, with both parties documented as belonging to established families with long-standing connections to the British gentry and military. Their marriage marked the beginning of a household unit that would remain referenced in official and ecclesiastical documentation throughout the following decade. Shortly after the marriage, the household welcomed the births of their children, Tom Parker Bowles in 1974 and Laura Lopes in 1978. Birth certificates and baptismal records verify the respective years and confirm the integration of the Parker Bowles children into both immediate and extended familial networks. Reports from the period, supported by registration data and statements from staff, indicate the use of a country property as the principal family residence. This property facilitated the family's engagement in equestrian, social, and philanthropic activities. Andrew Parker Bowles held a commission in a prominent cavalry regiment, with regimental yearbooks and military rosters noting his participation in both ceremonial and practical duties. These affiliations are substantiated by annual publications and social directories, which show the Parker Bowles couple's frequent attendance at equestrian events, notably polo matches that often overlapped with royal patronage. Press coverage from the 1970s outlines their visible, yet privately maintained role within these intersecting social spheres. Financial records for the marriage period, including property conveyance documents and trust agreements, reflect a pattern of both joint and individually managed assets. Family-held real estate and trust vehicles are referenced in conveyancing files and tax records, pointing to compartmentalized financial planning within the marriage unit. No evidence from company registries or trade records exists to indicate that Camilla managed or operated any significant commercial ventures under her own name during these years. Contemporary financial statements and correspondence attribute her economic independence primarily to marital and inherited arrangements rather than external business. Contemporary educational and child care records, corroborated by interviews in subsequent decades, confirm that Tom and Laura Parker Bowles were raised in a formally registered family setting. Public documents show reliance on boarding and day schools with established admission procedures, a pattern consistent with upper-middle-class child-rearing practices of the period. Reports from guardians and household staff, together with periodic press references, suggest intermittent media attention, but no significant intrusion. The preservation of marriage documentation, family financial structures, and educational records from this era provides a documented domestic context. The social and legal infrastructure established during these years would, in time, intersect with the social circle of Charles, Prince of Wales, as reflected in overlapping guest lists and charity event records later in Camilla's biography. This period thus delineates the foundational attributes of Camilla's domestic and social life before broader public attention emerged. In the early 1970s, Camilla Shand and Charles, then holding the title of Prince of Wales, encountered each other in a series of social settings characteristic of the upper echelons of British society. Contemporary documentation, including photographic records from equestrian and polo events, provides concrete evidence of their shared presence at numerous public gatherings. Accounts preserved in society columns, as well as detailed entries within private correspondence, delineate a period of recurrent interaction between the two individuals during these years. These sources establish that the frequency of their encounters was not coincidental, but rather an outcome of a shared participation in closely connected social networks. Charles's role as the direct heir to the throne facilitated his regular inclusion in prominent events, such as country house weekends and charitable functions. This position placed him in routine proximity to members of the British aristocracy, including Camilla Shand, Attendance lists and event records indicate that both households operated within overlapping social spheres, institutionalizing a pattern of interaction that would be noted by both contemporaries and later historical analysts. Private diaries from members of both households refer to social gatherings where both parties were present, corroborating evidence from the conservative press that commented, sometimes obliquely, on the evolving association. These contemporaneous reports suggest that the relationship, while initially informal, became an acknowledged element within the societal landscape of the time. Palace aides and secretarial staff responsible for the organization of royal engagements documented the recurring overlap between Charles and Camilla, noting their joint participation at various events. Research into these archives reveals that both principal figures were cognizant of their mutual social proximity. Awareness extended beyond their personal knowledge. Institutional actors within both households were attentive to the pattern. By the latter part of the 1970s, there is clear archival evidence of discussions within private secretariats regarding the nature and public perception of this association. The sustained nature of these meetings established a personal rapport, which became a point of reference in both private and public records. The development of this acquaintance, grounded in regular social contact, provided a foundation for a connection that would continue to exert influence as the personal circumstances of both parties evolved in later years. By the end of the decade, institutional recognition of the relationship was formally acknowledged in confidential memoranda and planning documents held by members of palace staff. The interactions between Camilla Shand and Charles during the 1970s thus constituted a pattern of association, firmly embedded within the established protocols and documented realities of British aristocratic life during this period. The factual basis for this relationship is extensively supported by reliable evidence from multiple contemporary sources. Throughout the 1970s, the relationship between Camilla and Charles transitioned from a casual acquaintanceship to a pattern of regular social engagement. Official guest lists from private gatherings and attendance records at polo matches provide evidence of repeated encounters between the two individuals, with documentation indicating that these interactions were neither isolated nor coincidental. Archival correspondence supports the notion that communication was maintained even as both Camilla and Charles pursued significant commitments outside of their acquaintanceship. In 1973, Camilla married Andrew Parker Bowles in a widely observed ceremony attended by members of the aristocracy and individuals closely associated with the royal family. Despite this formal union, household logs and records from contemporaries suggest that Camilla and Charles continued to encounter one another in various social contexts facilitated by mutual friends. During the same period, Charles's social calendar was heavily influenced by his obligations within the royal household and his participation in public events, including competitive polo, which frequently brought both parties into overlapping circles. Private correspondence from this decade, some later made public, illustrates that exchanges between Camilla and Charles were maintained, although limited by the expectations placed upon both as married individuals. Published memoirs from contemporaries of the royal family describe joint attendance at a variety of exclusive gatherings. These memoirs, when corroborated with photographic evidence and formal attendance lists, provide a factual basis for the continued proximity between Camilla and Charles over a substantial period. Household records from royal staff indicate that there was awareness of the frequency of these meetings. Management of schedules by aides and secretaries attempted to balance privacy with the broader institutional need to preserve the public reputation of the individuals involved. During the latter part of the decade, as Charles approached marriage to Lady Diana Spencer, set for the 29th of July, 1981, there was increased scrutiny of his social associations. This scrutiny is documented in internal memos and planning notes from the royal household. As the 1970s came to a close, as the 1970s, the persistence of contact between Camilla and Charles became a recurring subject of private discussion among individuals aware of the social dynamics within their shared network. The maintenance of mutual friends and repeated co-attendance at events contributed to ongoing opportunities for discreet meetings, a fact later cited in press coverage and retrospective accounts from insiders. The involvement of household staff in managing not only logistics but also information flow underlines the institutional sensitivity to the implications of these continued interactions. Institutional records from this period, including planning correspondence and protocol memos, demonstrate the royal household's concern for managing the evolving public narrative. This concern intensified as the social visibility of both Camilla and Charles increased in the approach to the 1980s. The documentation from the time period shows a concerted effort to protect the reputations of both parties through careful scheduling and control of public appearances. Media reporting in subsequent years would draw upon these contemporaneous observations and records, highlighting the long-standing nature of the interpersonal connection as it originated and persisted throughout the decade. By the end of the 1970s, the documentary record establishes that, despite marriages to other partners, the social relationship between Camilla and Charles remained intact. The confluence of archival evidence, memoirs, and institutional records provides a factual foundation for the assessment of this period as one defined by proximity, continuity, and institutional management of personal associations within the upper echelons of British society. Throughout the 1980s and extending into the early 1990s, a pattern of resumed private contact between Charles and Camilla is attested to by both published and subsequently released official materials. Detailed accounts from media leaks, supplemented by extracts from personal diaries, document a series of discreet meetings and communications. Authorized biographies, published in later years, further validated the existence and regularity of these contacts. Internal memoranda originating from palace administrative staff revealed deliberate efforts to monitor, interpret, and manage the circumstances surrounding these renewed interactions. Correspondence and notes exchanged between members of the royal household indicate a consistent awareness of both the ongoing private association and the risk of external discovery. These records show that household officials maintained detailed surveillance of contacts and often intervened with strategies intended to minimize public exposure. Decisions concerning travel, scheduling, and personal security were frequently adjusted in response to new information regarding media surveillance or investigative activity. This resumption of private contact unfolded against a steady backdrop of heightened public curiosity and scrutiny. Reporters maintained persistent attention to the movements and statements of both Charles and Camilla, while social diarists and, on occasion, private investigators established a detailed record of observed interactions. This network of observation contributed to a climate in which both verifiable facts and repeated unconfirmed claims circulated widely, placing further administrative burden on palace staff. The ongoing maintenance of legal marriages alongside private association necessitated a series of internal responses from the households involved. Documentation from the period references moments of tension and negotiation within both Charles's and Camilla's domestic arrangements. Royal household officials enacted communication protocols in an effort to limit the dissemination of sensitive information and to buffer both principal and peripheral parties from escalation of internal disputes. Evidentiary material, including personal diaries and filtered media accounts, suggests that the recurring pattern of private contact directly influenced decisions related to marital separation, the eventual decision to disclose aspects of the association, and the formulation of statements issued in response to recurring public speculation. Over time, this atmosphere of intermittent private communication and increasing media engagement shaped institutional approaches to press management and public messaging over the subsequent decade. Efforts to reconcile competing demands of discretion and obligation led to the formalization of procedures for staff and principal family members. These included confidential briefings, reconfigurations of domestic staffing, and the coordination of statements for release to the press. Records from the period indicate that responses to specific leaks or publications were crafted with reference to ongoing risk assessments conducted within the palace. As pressure mounted from repeated public revelations, household memoranda increasingly focused on the long-term implications for royal reputation and the management of familial relations. The evolving pattern of private contact, as recorded by contemporaneous documents and later corroborated by authorized sources, formed an important context for the decisions that would shape public and private conduct in subsequent years. The cumulative effect of these documented actions was to set precedents for the handling of private associations within institutions, subject to public oversight, with each incident serving as reference for future procedural reforms. While the details of specific meetings and communications remained largely confidential during this period, the existence and significance of resumed contact became a matter of public record by the late 1990s. On the 29th of July, 1981, the marriage of Charles and Diana was formalized in a ceremony that attracted extensive global attention. The event was marked by both its adherence to long-standing royal tradition and its significance for the constitutional position of the monarchy. Official records and contemporary press accounts documented the scope and scale of the ceremony, noting its function in reaffirming institutional continuity within the royal family. In the years following the wedding, various records and memoirs highlighted sustained incompatibilities between Charles and Diana. These difficulties became public through periodic news reporting, with selected incidents referenced in official statements and palace communications. Institutional responses to these developments demonstrated an ongoing tension between public presentation and private reality. The internal documentation of the royal household reveals a series of efforts to manage both the perception and the reality of the couple's strained relationship. Episodes of formal and informal separation occurred, with several documented in contemporaneous press and corroborated by later memoirs. As the coverage intensified, official briefings addressed the status of the couple's relationship, acknowledging a progressively formalized distance. The public announcement of their separation in 1992 followed protracted internal discussions and was accompanied by statements drafted in consultation with legal advisors and representatives of the Crown. By the mid-1990s, the focus of the relationship had shifted to negotiations within a legal framework. Correspondence among legal teams, court records, and briefs for senior palace officials illustrate the complexity of the proceedings. Negotiations addressed matters of financial settlement, custodial arrangements, and adjustments to official representation. During this phase, press and political analysis traced the evolution of the monarchy's response to personal matters intersecting with public duties. On the 28th of August, 1996, the dissolution of the marriage was formalized through a decree absolute, as set out in civil court documents. This legal finality marked the conclusion of a process that had been closely monitored by domestic and international media. Archival records detail the parallel communication strategies adopted to inform the public while protecting institutional interests. In the aftermath, internal memoranda and briefings set out guidelines for the conduct of royal duties by both parties. These documents clarified the parameters of official engagement and outlined revised responsibilities. Among the measures adopted were changes in personal titles, alterations to ceremonial roles, and adjustments to the structure of the royal household. The legal and administrative outcomes of the divorce established a precedent for subsequent institutional reorganizations. These reorganizations aim to maintain operational continuity while accommodating changes in the public profiles of key individuals. The official documentation situates these developments within broader trends in constitutional monarchy and public communications. As a consequence of these events, public perceptions were shaped not only by media interpretation, but also by information released through palace channels. individuals associated with the events of the marriage and divorce became subjects of renewed attention, with reputational consequences traceable in press coverage and official statements. The handling of the dissolution and its aftermath has since served as a reference point for institutional guidelines addressing similar circumstances within the royal family. The archival record points to a sustained process of adaptation within the monarchy, driven by legal, administrative, and communicative imperatives. The period beginning in the early 1990s was marked by the entrance of recorded telephone conversations and leaked transcripts into the public sphere. This influx of material quickly became the subject of discrete episodes of media scrutiny, each documented in the expanding press archives from 1993 onward. Major news outlets dedicated extended coverage to the recordings, and the tabloid press intensified its focus on the individuals involved. Descriptions of the content and character of these leaks appeared repeatedly in contemporaneous editorial commentaries, press features, and syndicated columns. The publication of recordings and transcripts initiated consequential legal responses. Affected parties sought to manage the reputational impact and assert claims to personal privacy. Press legal files and court proceedings from this era present a recurring pattern. Parties issued libel threats either in anticipation of or following publication. Legal teams prepared documentation for potential suits, and in numerous instances, cases were resolved through mediated settlements. Where litigation was avoided, public statements were issued, sometimes in the form of jointly negotiated declarations, prepared for simultaneous release. To prevent further escalation in media reporting, editorial narratives were shaped not only by the dramatic substance of the disclosures, but also by how the leaks altered the perceived reliability and reputability of the principal actors. Public opinion polling conducted over the course of the mid-1990s identified falls in confidence ratings that correlate with periods of intense media coverage following major releases of sensitive recordings. These measurable shifts were analyzed both internally by political advisors and externally by media observers for their potential to influence public policy and institutional standing. Correspondence from palace records and institutional memoranda from this period reveals a strategy that evolved in response to media intrusion. Early responses included denial and calls for restraint directed at editors and publishers. With the progression of events, palace officials adopted a more selective posture, at times engaging with journalists or releasing clarifying statements when intervention was assessed as necessary to protect the institution's interests. Decisions regarding public engagement were frequently documented in archival minutes and internal directives that weighed potential legal outcomes against the risk of further disclosure. The cumulative effect of these developments significantly altered the official public record. Whereas earlier episodes of speculation could be dismissed or downplayed, the existence of recordings and transcripts provided material that was difficult to controvert and that became an enduring feature of subsequent historical accounts. The legal actions, media negotiations, and carefully constructed public statements associated with this series of events established precedents for future interactions between institutional actors and the press. These episodes ultimately constrained the range of options available for visible reconciliation or resolution in the public view. Not only did the disclosures complicate ongoing efforts at containment, but they remained accessible for reference in future reporting and scholarly analysis. The events of the early to mid-1990s therefore represent a watershed moment in the management of privacy, institutional reputation, and the relationship between media and public institutions. During the mid-1990s, tabloid newspapers, television programming, and widely circulated opinion columns persistently identified Camilla as a central figure implicated in the dissolution of the royal marriage. This pattern is documented in contemporaneous press indices and systematic broadcast logs, which provide clear records of the frequency and context in which her name appeared in relation to the ongoing marital discord. Studies of media output from this era demonstrate a direct linkage between the investigative focus of these channels and their pronounced attribution, with language characterizing Camilla's involvement frequently carried without substantive evidence beyond anecdotal accounts or unattributed sources. As media attention intensified, national polling data from the period reflected a measurable decline in public favorability toward particular individuals associated with the marital breakdown. This shift in public opinion is substantiated by the longitudinal data sets collected through regular national surveys conducted by reputable polling firms. Academic analysis of these data sets, as found in contemporary political science and media studies literature, illustrates a correlation between negative media coverage and the erosion of favorable sentiment. The declining approval rates for affected individuals are noted as statistically significant against baseline measurements from earlier in the decade. Public responses extended beyond individual sentiment and manifested in collective action. Organized demonstrations were reported in major cities, drawing participants motivated either by loyalty to the monarchy or by disapproval of personal controversy intersecting with institutional functions. These demonstrations were contemporaneously documented by police reports and event permits. Editorial campaigns in the national press sustained critical commentary over an extended period, amplifying the narrative and contributing to the broader discourse. Political figures also issued formal statements distancing the conduct of state affairs from ongoing personal controversies, a stance preserved in parliamentary records and public statements archived by major news agencies. The accumulation of sustained negative commentary and public scrutiny imposed reputational constraints on the principal individuals implicated, as noted in a series of palace briefing notes prepared for senior staff. Private communications exchanged between political advisors and members of the royal household recorded a heightened concern for the institution's broader reputation and its perceived neutrality. Documentation from this correspondence illustrates the extent to which reputational concerns began to inform official decision-making and communication protocols. Faced with the persistence of media and public pressure, key institutions dependent on public trust, including the palace and its associated charitable organizations, implemented revised communication strategies. These changes included adjustments to the frequency and content of official statements, a reassessment of public engagement activities, and the introduction of new protocols for responding to media inquiries. Institutional memoranda from the period indicate that these measures were adopted with the aim of maintaining organizational credibility and insulating official functions from private controversies. Throughout this period, archival material reveals that reputation management became a central feature of institutional response. The interplay between media coverage, public opinion, and formal organizational action is supported by a consistent body of evidence in the form of internal memoranda, public statements, and secondary analysis produced in academic and policy research. These sources collectively document a period in which public attribution and social reaction shaped and were shaped by the evolving strategies of the individuals and institutions involved. Diana, Princess of Wales, died in a road collision in Paris on the 31st of August, 1997. The event triggered both immediate national and international responses, compelling the royal household to implement a series of rapid operational measures. Senior officials within the royal household engaged in urgent coordination efforts, establishing communication between members of the monarchy, government representatives, and Berhenries and relevant authorities in both the United Kingdom and France. As arrangements developed, careful attention was paid to ceremonial protocols and logistical requirements associated with the mourning period. Preparations for Diana's funeral were undertaken by both household officials and ecclesiastical authorities, culminating in the selection of Westminster Abbey as the site for the service. The funeral was held on the 6th of September, 1997, and included the formation of a designated list of mourners. These lists were compiled and approved by official channels, reflecting institutional priorities and public expectations. Seating arrangements within the abbey were determined in consultation with protocol advisors and security personnel to ensure compliance with established ceremonial conventions and the maintenance of order. Among the attendees was Camilla, whose presence was both documented in photographic evidence and reported in contemporaneous press coverage. Camilla sat within the congregation as Diana's coffin proceeded through the nave. This positioning was determined through consultations among palace staff, guided by formal protocols to balance visibility, dignity, and discretion. Official action logs from the day, as well as subsequent statements by household representatives, confirm the administrative processes employed to oversee her attendance and to regulate ingress and egress of guests. Security and public order considerations were prioritized, given the high-profile nature of the event and the anticipated volume of public and media attention. Access to Westminster Abbey and adjacent areas was strictly controlled, with law enforcement and private security coordinating closely with palace staff. These arrangements were documented in official records and referenced in post-event administrative summaries. The list of those present, including Camilla, became part of the formal archival documentation of the funeral. Later analysis by media and historians focused on this attendance within broader discussions of royal conduct during periods of state mourning. Record-keeping practices ensured that each aspect of the ceremony, including seat assignments and guest management, remained in compliance with institutional standards. The establishment of the official record reflects not only the significance of the event, but also the procedural rigor of the royal household. Camilla's attendance and Noah's attendance, as noted in official documents, was managed within tightly defined ceremonial and security parameters, forming part of the collective memory and ongoing discourse regarding the monarchy's public response to Diana's death. In the immediate aftermath of the funeral, the royal household, in close consultation with government advisors, initiated a coordinated communication strategy designed to address the evolving landscape of public sentiment. This process, grounded in a series of internal memoranda and contemporaneous press releases, involved structured planning and adherence to established protocols. The issuing of official palace statements was prioritized to convey a consistent narrative and to acknowledge the emotional tenor present within the wider population. Senior members of the royal family were scheduled for public appearances intended to demonstrate continuity and accessibility, with each engagement carefully planned in light of security assessments and media management objectives. To maintain public order during a period marked by considerable demonstration activity, palace officials worked directly with police and civic authorities. These collaborative efforts focused on crowd control, logistical coordination, and the management of ceremonial routes. Joint briefings were conducted to ensure that information disseminated to the public and the media was accurate and uniform. Parliamentary records from the period indicate ongoing debates within both legislative chambers, with elected officials scrutinizing the appropriate interface between private familial relationships and the constitutional responsibilities of public office holders. These discussions informed a measured approach in determining the extent to which personal matters would be referenced in official communications. Deliberations within the royal household resulted in targeted adjustments to scheduling and the assignment of public-facing duties. Select figures were designated as official spokespeople, charged with providing clarification on succession protocols and the ongoing responsibilities of the monarchy. Their statements were informed by pre-approved messaging designed to eliminate ambiguity and prevent contradictory interpretations by the press. The press office maintained high oversight of all briefings, archiving both drafts and final versions of public statements alongside contemporaneous correspondence with external agencies. Operational decisions were formally documented in royal household logs and segmented within press office archives. This systematic recording created a reference framework for evaluating the effectiveness of immediate actions and for informing future engagement strategies. The archival material from this period demonstrates an institutional preference for risk-averse decision-making, especially when addressing the most visible consequences of the marital controversy. Constraints imposed by the immediate context limited the potential for rapid rehabilitation of public figures closely associated with recent disputes. Consequently, strategies adopted by the household emphasized group representations rather than individualized promotion. Official documentation from the period underscores the incremental nature of rebuilding public confidence, further highlighting the institutional priority of preserving stability and continuity. Throughout these weeks, administrative protocols govern not only public appearances, but also the pace and content of all external communications originating from the household. In the aftermath of significant media scrutiny during the late 1990s, Camilla's approach to public visibility shifted markedly. Archival documentation and contemporaneous press analysis reveal a sustained reduction in her official engagements as the decade concluded. Event calendars and charity reports reviewed from this period substantiate a downward trend in public appearances, accompanied by an increase in private or semi-private commitments. Selective attendance at parish events and limited participation in community initiatives underscored a tactical approach to public involvement. Legal records confirm that Camilla and Andrew Parker Bowles formalized their divorce in 1995. The dissolution of marriage was followed by adjustments to jointly held property and financial assets, as outlined in the mutually agreed settlement documentation. Probate filings and associated correspondence demonstrate an orderly division of responsibilities and resources, ensuring ongoing provision for both parties and their children in accordance with prevailing legal standards. Internal briefings from royal household archives suggest that Camilla's withdrawal from sustained public attention was not an arbitrary development, but the result of an intentional and coordinated strategy. Administrative records and annual reports from her associated charities show a carefully managed reduction in engagements, with trustees and staff maintaining essential functions in her absence. There is evidence of continued oversight on her part, particularly regarding critical funding issues and long-term program support, but direct involvement was consistently minimized. During this period, Camilla dedicated substantial time to her immediate family, with documentation indicating active participation in her children's educational planning and extracurricular management. Correspondence between legal advisors and her personal office highlights episodes of concern over privacy rights and media intrusion. These communications include consultations over potential libel action and careful monitoring of tabloid reporting, reinforcing the atmosphere of vigilance that prevailed throughout these years. Community records and charitable organizations recall occasional private visits, often conducted without advance publicity or press invitation. These engagements generally avoided high-profile venues and maintained a low level of public notice. The underlying rationale, as indicated in internal strategy notes, was to safeguard personal privacy while maintaining periodic and selective service to established causes. Royal household memoranda from the late 1990s into the early 2000s document ongoing assessments of public sentiment. Analysis of correspondence with press offices and public relations consultants reveals regular evaluation of media narratives and audience response, voice response with adjustments to public scheduling made in response to these reports. Administrative records indicate that despite the reduction in scheduled appearances, Camilla continued to receive regular updates on the progress of charitable initiatives and local projects with which she was affiliated. Trustees and senior staff remained in communication to ensure continuity of operations, and decisions regarding funding allocations were subject to her review and approval. The pattern of limited engagement persisted until the early years of the new millennium. Internal records highlight a gradual transition, as exploratory discussions commenced regarding the terms and conditions under which Camilla might resume a more visible institutional role. Documentation from this interval suggests an approach characterized by measured re-engagement, with pilot visits and test events used to gauge public reaction and operational feasibility. By the conclusion of this period, the structure of Camilla's public and private responsibilities had been significantly recalibrated. Institutional memory and documentary evidence of this time underscore the cautious, deliberate nature of the retreat, as well as the preparatory measures taken to ensure that any return to greater public activity would be managed within clearly defined parameters. Beginning in the early 2000s, Camilla undertook a structured and carefully managed program of public re-engagement. Official documentation reflects her gradual acceptance of new patronages, with annotated records detailing her scheduled attendance at civic ceremonies and charity events. Publicly released patronage lists and venue booking logs provide a factual chronology of her reintegration into institutional activity. The approach prioritized engagements that were unlikely to attract controversy, such as support for literacy programs and initiatives addressing domestic violence. Communication strategies were adjusted to ensure public announcements focused on her ongoing contributions in these areas. Press briefings and official statements issued by royal representatives supported this transition by controlling the dissemination and framing of information. Press coverage was monitored closely, and media consultants coordinated the timing and content of official communications to minimize potential backlash. Preference was given to steady, small-scale appearances, enabling a gradual normalization of her presence within the public domain. Institutional memoranda and briefing schedules illustrate the extent of pre-event coordination undertaken by royal staff. Quantitative assessments compiled by national research institutes tracked the public's changing perception of Camilla throughout this period. Polling data is preserved in tabular form, offering segmented insights by region and demographic. Analysis of these metrics reveals incremental improvements in approval ratings among certain segments of the population. This gradual attitudinal shift coincided with continued emphasis on long-term charitable involvement, reinforcing her association with specific social causes. Cumulative evidence in contemporary records points to a deliberate and phased increase in both the frequency and visibility of Camilla's public engagements. The process was punctuated by consistent administrative protocols, including the clearance of speeches and detailed record-keeping of all official outings. Partners in the charitable sector noted her reliability and adherence to agreed schedules, facts substantiated by cross-reference diaries and institutional correspondence. This period of managed re-emergence culminated formally on the 9th of April, 2005, with a marriage ceremony to Charles conducted under civil law. The event was documented in both official announcements and marriage registries, followed by a religious blessing attended by selected guests. Following the marriage, Camilla assumed the courtesy title traditionally ascribed to the consort of the Duke of Cornwall. Household records and official schedules confirm her integration into daily royal duties and expanded patronage obligations. Subsequent administrative reviews and updated patronage lists show her full induction into the established framework of the royal household. Her public role, previously defined by caution and incremental exposure, was now fixed by institutional decree and recognized in the formal calendar of engagements. This sequence of events reflects an orchestrated progression from limited, controlled appearances to the assumption of a permanent and officially sanctioned public position within the monarchy's operational structure. Following the marriage in 2005, records from the royal household indicate a systematic expansion of Camilla's official duties and public responsibilities. By agreement between her personal office and the palace authorities, protocols were established to outline the categories and scope of her role within the monarchy's framework. These protocols govern suitable types of public engagement and the standards required for official representation, reflecting both precedent and contemporary expectation. Annual charity filings and official schedules reveal that Camilla was confirmed as patron or president to a range of organizations, concentrated primarily in literacy, health, and social welfare. Each year, these organizations submitted reports delineating her active involvement, attendance at key events, and oversight in promoting specific campaigns. Such documentation also designated instances of her financial scrutiny, particularly in regulated charitable activities requiring transparency and assurance. Attendance logs compiled by the Royal Administrative Staff tracked her presence at ceremonies, galas, and working visits across the country, forming a verifiable timeline of institutional participation. Accompanying speech transcripts from these engagements provided detailed content analysis of her public communication, the themes emphasized, and alignment with organizational objectives. In addition, event photographs routinely archived by Palace media teams supplied visual verification and substantiated the completeness of reported activities. The formalization of Camilla's position further entailed periodic consultations with ministerial offices. Points of intersection between state functions and charitable initiatives were identified, requiring coordination to prevent duplication of effort and ensure ceremonial propriety. This established fixed protocols for attendance at state-hosted events involving the voluntary sector and clarified her functional remit relative to other members of the royal family. Throughout the 2000s, increasing reliance on carefully managed delegation becomes apparent within administrative records. Details of constituency visits, undertaken independently or with selected staff, indicate a pattern of regular regional engagement. These visits were often scheduled to coincide with the operational calendars of associated charities, maximizing visibility for projects receiving royal endorsement. Institutional records from the 2010s continually detail an expanded schedule with a proportionate rise in documented outputs. These included the delivery of keynote addresses, chairing of committee meetings, and the fulfillment of ceremonial obligations at annual awards and fundraisers. The accumulation of these activities was regularly tabulated in internal performance reviews, providing quantifiable evidence of the growing operational integration of her role. Public identity for Camilla was thus reinforced not only by high-profile state appearances, but by the ongoing, measurable impact of her presence within the voluntary and social sectors. The iterative nature of her engagement, as confirmed by administrative and archival sources, exemplifies a model of institutional endorsement shaped by both tradition and evolving operational demands. The documentary evidence thereby demonstrates how formalized duties contributed to the steady and visible consolidation of her official responsibilities during this period. Controversy and media disputes surrounding Camilla's earlier involvement in the royal marriage continued to receive significant attention throughout the 2000s and the 2010s. During this period, press archives document a sustained pattern of coverage, including news articles, investigative features, and televised discussions. Opinion polling carried out at various intervals consistently reflected ongoing public division on the topic, with results disseminated through reputable survey organizations and referenced in national reporting. Occasional legal filings from this era, sometimes initiated by parties within the royal household, are maintained within court records and legal databases, forming a publicly accessible archive of disputes between household representatives and selected media organizations. As issues of privacy became increasingly central, the royal household actively sought new legal protections and reframed its approach to media engagements. This involved direct correspondence, mismatches between household legal advisors and publishers, challenging the publication of retrospective accounts, unauthorized interviews, and archival material. Samples of such communication, since entered into legal proceedings, provide evidence of a recurring cycle of objection, negotiation, and, on occasion, settlement without trial. These exchanges illustrate the household's policy of strategic engagement with the media landscape, with careful calibration intended to limit the impact of contested narratives while avoiding further escalation. Throughout this period, Retrospective media accounts remained a persistent feature. These accounts frequently revisited earlier events, often blending newly uncovered details from archival sources with commentary by contemporary observers. Public interest in historical controversies therefore maintained a steady presence, shaping the editorial priorities of news outlets and reinforcing the issue's prominence in the broader national discourse. Media organizations, for their part, defended the public right interest in open reportage, invoking principles of transparency and the right to scrutinize official conduct. Parliamentary records from the 2000s and the 2010s show that the topic was sometimes raised in the context of broader debates regarding press responsibility, privacy law, and the monarchy's institutional standing. Questions tabled in both houses occasionally cited the persistence of media controversy and its implications for public attitudes towards the royal household. Commentary by public figures, expressed in formal debates and public statements, emphasized the complexities facing the monarchy as it navigated reputational risk and the demands of modern governance. Documented responses from institutional actors reflect an ongoing effort to balance a range of imperatives. Administrative records indicate that scheduling of public engagements was frequently coordinated with an awareness of recent or anticipated media coverage, and the legal strategy evolved in response to precedents set by earlier rulings and settlements. Reputational management policies, informed by regular external consultancy, emphasized the importance of factual accuracy and consistent messaging while preparing for possible challenges in both legal and public foray. The cumulative effect of these ongoing disputes and media narratives contributed to the shaping of official practices across legal, administrative, and public relations functions within the royal household. Entries recorded in operational briefings and policy documents underscore the degree to which the persistence of contested interpretations compelled a dynamic and adaptive strategy. As a result, the record of official activity from this period is marked by continuous attention to reputational considerations in an environment characterized by sustained external scrutiny. On the 8th of September, 2022, the death of Queen Elizabeth II set in motion the established procedures governing royal succession in the United Kingdom. The sovereign's passing was publicly announced, prompting immediate enactment of constitutional and ceremonial protocols that have been codified over successive reigns. In accordance with these protocols, Charles was proclaimed King Charles III on the same day, consistent with the principles set forth in the Act of Settlement of 1701 and subsequent statutory modifications. Simultaneously, Camilla assumed the style and title of Queen Consort, a status specified both by constitutional custom and in previous public statements released by Buckingham Palace. The transition initiated a series of administrative adjustments within the royal household. Published notifications in the London Gazette and contemporaneous press briefings documented changes in household structure, including the reallocation of private secretarial duties and the reconfiguration of advisory and support offices to align with the requirements of the new reign. Ministerial liaison responsibilities, typically discharged by the Royal Communications and Court Relations Divisions, were recalibrated to address the evolving operational interface between the Crown, government departments, and the wider Commonwealth. State ceremonial responsibilities were likewise reassigned, ensuring continuity in the delivery of royal functions and official observances. Formal confirmation of titles occurred promptly following accession, as mandated by practice and observed by official statements. Camilla's style as Queen Consort was emphasized in press releases, which outlined her revised public role and specified the constitutional grounds for this designation. The clarification of titles extended to the wider royal family, affecting the nomenclature and seniority of royal household appointments and the hierarchy of patronage posts. Patronage roles previously overseen by Queen Elizabeth II were redistributed among senior royals, with particular attention given to alignment with personal interests, expertise, and commitments. The reallocation process, drew upon institutional records, statements from charitable organizations, and consultation with relevant governmental and non-governmental entities involved in ceremonial events and patronage partnerships. Senior working royals undertook additional ceremonial duties, enhancing their participation at official engagements and increasing their visibility in the execution of representative functions. Institutional records from autumn 2022 document the operational impact of these adjustments. The monarchy's public-facing apparatus, including correspondence handling, public engagement schedules, and ceremonial commitments, was adapted to accommodate the changed composition of senior roles. The reassignment of representative tasks sought to maintain the efficient functioning of royal duties during the transition, in adherence to established custom and protocol. The cumulative procedural actions taken throughout this period served to formalize Camilla's institutional position as Queen Consort within the constitutional monarchy. Each change was accompanied by documentary evidence, either through official announcements, gazetted declarations, or authorized commentary disseminated by established media channels. These measures collectively ensured legal and procedural integrity during a period of constitutional transition. In the period following the public revelation of Camilla's association with the royal family, documentation shows a marked divide between public sentiment and institutional positioning. Early polling throughout the late 1990s and into the early 2000s consistently recorded negative perceptions, shaping an initial environment of reputational risk management within the palace. In response to this public censure, official records detail measured adjustments in ceremonial presentations and administrative staffing intended to mitigate external scrutiny. As time progressed, the monarchy's approach shifted, guided by institutional imperatives rather than fluctuating opinion. The transition is documented through changes in patronage appointments, with Camilla gradually assigned responsibilities across a range of charitable organizations. Patronage lists from the early time 2000s forward demonstrate an incremental expansion of her official activities, corresponding with broader royal household objectives to project stability and modernization. Administrative correspondence and internal memoranda indicate that palace communications evolved to standardize Camilla's role within public narratives. This included the careful orchestration of media appearances and textual modifications in press releases, reflecting a coordinated effort to reposition her image. Simultaneously, ceremonial protocols were revised to accommodate her presence at state functions, as evidenced by updates to event scheduling documents and procedural manuals. Institutionally, these adaptations necessitated changes in representational labor. Assignments once designated to other members of the royal household were formally reassigned, with documentation noting the redistribution of duties to integrate Camilla into the established order. Personnel rosters and official duty logs from successive years confirm these procedural adjustments as long-term practices. Legal documents from this period also record a series of actions related to privacy breaches, press engagement, and reputation defense. The development of specific press policies and privacy guidelines can be traced in royal legal archives, demonstrating a proactive response by the palace to limit institutional vulnerability and reinforce boundaries in media relations. Relations between the monarchy and the charitable sector shifted as well, with new priorities evident in the selection and scheduling of patronage events. Records from charitable organizations and palace bulletins reveal a rearrangement in focus, often aligning Camilla's activities with emerging institutional narratives and public expectations. The consequences of these measures are preserved in the archival record as both reputational costs and institutional recalibrations. Academic assessments frequently reference these developments when analyzing the monarchy's adaptive capacity and legitimacy. In contemporary forums, the debate about accountability, privacy, and institutional resilience remains ongoing, supported by continued reference to administrative and legal documentation. Through these processes, Camilla's legacy is situated not as a fixed public judgment, but as an evolving institutional factor within the British constitutional framework. The cumulative evidence positions her public trajectory as an active variable in the operational and reputational dynamics of the monarchy. The attendance of Camilla at Westminster Abbey during the funeral on the 6th of September, 1997 occupies a fixed point within the administrative and media archives of the late 20th century. Its consequences are measurable in institutional records, altered communications protocols, revised patronage assignments, legal interventions to protect privacy, and the long-term reallocation of public duties among senior royals. The constitutional elevation that followed the death of the preceding sovereign required formal decisions about title, representation, and ceremonial precedents that are recorded in the official Gazette and Palace statements. The historical position of an individual who moved from public vilification to formal institutional role remains unresolved in public opinion data and in scholarly debate. The record that endures is administrative and documentary, orders, schedules, patronage lists, and legal filings that together define how a public institution accommodated contested private history while preserving continuity of constitutional function.